So as we jump in this morning, I want to just create a main theme of what we're going to be talking about, and it's this. As we become aware of the needs around us, we are moved to take action, right? That's the main theme this morning is as we become more aware of the needs around us, we are moved to take action. So last week we kicked off this brand new sermon series entitled The Generous Life. And so last week we talked about how we can be generous in multiple areas of our life. About 7 different areas we talked about. How we can be generous with our thoughts, right? We can be generous with our words. We can be generous with our money. We can be generous with our influence. We can be generous with our time, our attention, and even our belongings. And so we talked about how generosity is so much more than money. Generosity is really about taking your entire life, everything you are and everything you own, and using it to bless the people around you. That's what generosity is. Saying, God, this is who I am. This is what I have. And everything I am and everything that I have, I want to be a blessing to those around me. And so last week we kicked off this series and we were talking about awareness. Right, how Jesus was fully aware, right? The woman pushed through and touches the hem of Jesus' garment, and he's like, who touched me? He was aware. Even in the midst of a crazy crowd, he's aware of what's happening. And if he's aware, shouldn't we be aware? And so this morning, we're gonna take that next step in the faith journey and say, okay, man, we're gonna go from awareness to action. So we're gonna be talking about activating our generosity. And it's important for us to know that desire is great, but we have to move from a desire to action. It reminds me of my efforts of becoming physically fit, right? Desire is great, right? I look in the mirror and I'm like, your boy needs to lose about 25 more pounds. And I'm like, but I need to, that's great. But if all I do is look in the mirror every day and go, I really need to lose weight. You know what I need to do? I need to do better with my diet. Two hamburgers, a large fry, and a large Coke later. I should probably do better with my diet, right? I should do more with that. It doesn't make any sense, does it, if we only look and are aware of the needs around us. And so in order to maybe shave some extra pounds, I need to move from awareness to an action, from a desire to action, and maybe start tracking some calories, maybe putting on the calendar, hey, you should get up tomorrow morning and go to the gym and not hit snooze 372 times and make it to work on time, but forget the gym time. And isn't that true with our generosity? We want to be generous people, then we need to move from desire and saying, I see the needs around me, I'm aware of the needs around me, but now it's time for me to begin to take action. And so my question for you this morning is, what are you going to do to be generous? Right? What are you going to do to be generous? Because there's needs all around us, and how are we going to bless another person today? Right? How do we move from a desire of being generous to an action of actually being generous? And so something amazing happens when we move into an action and we begin to see opportunities all around us. Like, oh my goodness, I didn't know there were so many needs that were available to me. Anybody ever bought a new car and then this phenomenon happens where you now see your car everywhere? Like you never noticed it before. I mean, what I'm talking about. Some of you are like, what's a new car? Okay, the newest used car, right? And so you buy it and you're like, I never even noticed that there was that car on the road. And now all of a sudden, everybody else has that car. How many know that that's not a thing? Those cars were actually there before you got your new car, but it's actually a psychology term, and it's called Bader-Meinhof, or frequency illusion, where those cars already existed, but what your mind is now going, oh, this awareness has now moved to an action. I'm now aware of what's around me. I'm looking for cars that are what? Like mine. So I remember we leased a truck, and I was like, this truck is so cool. I've never seen this truck on the road. Nobody has this truck. And on the way home, I think I found 3 people that had the same truck. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, I thought I was the only one. No, I wasn't the only one. I just wasn't aware. They were already there. My mind just wasn't paying attention. And now your mind is paying attention. And the same is true with our generosity. Once we start living with a generous heart, a generous mindset, our brain starts searching for more opportunities. It's like activating our brain of going, man, I now am more aware. I see needs, I see things, I see people, I see my time, I see my abilities now different. And now I want to be generous with those moments. So it seems so simple because generous people do generous things, right? Generous people do generous things. This morning, if you have your Bibles, we're going to turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 14, and we're going to be reading a bunch of verses this morning. But who better to look at when it comes to this heart issue of generosity, right? Living this generous life than obviously the person of Jesus. And remember, we kicked this series off last week, and we talked about how it's less about money, it's more about heart. Right? There are more areas of our life where we can be generous with than just our finances. All right, so this isn't just a series, you're like, man, this is my first time, second time here, and you're still talking about money. This is about our heart, being moved to the needs around us. It's even think about what we did this morning. We took some time to celebrate and to stand in the gap for vulnerable children, to say they matter, to say we see them, that their life has value. And not only are we aware of the great needs, that there are thousands of children just in the state of Ohio who are in the foster care system that need a welcoming, a loving, and a caring home. And so you were like, man, maybe I can't take a child in, but I can donate. And so what we took up an offering. And all of those funds, all of those resources are going to make a difference because of our generosity. And so this morning, let's look at Matthew chapter 14. We're going to start in verses 15 through 21 this morning. It says, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Now, it's important to see, it's already getting late. So it's dark is about to come. I don't know about you. Is anybody still messed up that at 5:15, it's pitch dark outside? Just making sure. I'm like, it's 9:30. No, it's 5:30. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. So some context of what's taking place. Jesus is doing ministry. There are thousands of people who are gathered. He's sharing, he's teaching. I just think it's awesome technology. Microphones didn't exist, and yet there's thousands of people. And Jesus is able to speak clearly and to teach. I sit back and in awe of, was there just a hunger and an appetite from people that were following Jesus? Like, shh, let him talk. Or they just wanted to listen and hear what he had to say. And everybody's kind of pushing in, and Jesus is healing the sick, and he's doing some great things. And now there's a need. Right? And the disciples are like, here's what we have. We got some bread, and we got some fish, and there's about 5,000. The scripture says there's 5,000 men. It does not mention women, does not mention children. So just imagine if all those men are married and they have some kids. And so your 5,000 now becomes 20,000. So there's about 20,000 people hanging out, and they're like, man, all of a sudden the disciples become aware of a need. And they're like, okay, somebody's got to do something. There's a problem. It's getting dark. And so these people need to go home, and they need to eat dinner, and so they're concerned. And understand, this is not something that's petty. This is not like, oh, this is like, why are you worried about it being dark? Dark is normal. Dark happens every day. Well, to travel at night in ancient times was not the thing you wanted to do, right? You moved during the day, and you stayed in at night. And so this is a genuine, heartfelt concern. Like Jesus, it's getting dark. They should be able to go home, and they need to get some food. So they're not complaining. They're just bringing a need to Jesus. And they were right. Like Jesus, this is all we have, and so maybe you should send them home. Right? And maybe Jesus should have been like, man, maybe we should. Maybe we should just send them home. So we don't know. The disciples are like, hey, send them home, get some food. Or maybe the disciples were thinking, but Jesus, you've been doing the miraculous. We've been following you. You're healing. You're teaching. And so this is a good moment. It's a great moment for you, Jesus, to show up and to do something awesome. And the disciples didn't do anything that we wouldn't do. How many know what I'm talking about? Right? The disciples did exactly what we would do. They would be like, hey, man, we identified a need, and we brought it to Jesus. There was a need, and we prayed about it. Like, Jesus, we need you to do something. But I love what Jesus says. He says this, you give them something to eat. What? What do you mean us? What do you mean me? Jesus, we've already spoken. We've already told you that we have 5 and 2. Thousands of people, and we only have a few loaves of bread and just a couple of fish, and now you're telling us to give him something to eat. So the disciples come to Jesus with a problem, and Jesus responds by telling them to solve it. I don't know about you, but when I typed that out and I read it, all I could think of was Vanilla Ice. I don't know why. It was like, if there's a problem, I'll solve it. Like, that's all I kept thinking of. So if that's what you remember today, I hope it's stuck in your brain for the rest of the week. But here's the deal, is now there's a problem, and Jesus is saying, you solve it. He doesn't perform a miracle. He doesn't give them 17 solutions, like here's what you could do. He says, no, you take care of it. You take care of it. You handle this because you're more than enough. And then all of a sudden the disciples respond how we would respond. We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So you say give them something to eat. Our response is we would, however, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. And then Jesus puts the responsibility back on the disciples. Like, you feed them, you take care of it. And they're like, but here's the issue, Jesus. We have limitations. We have limitations. And so often I feel like maybe that's what we do, is we're like, Jesus, I hear what you're trying to say, and I know what you're trying to say, and I know what you're asking of me, but I'm very limited in what I'm able to do. This is a story about fish and loaves of bread, but really it's a story about not having enough. Not having enough. Because when we look at perspective sometimes, and at the end of service, you're going to have an opportunity to not just be generous in an offering, but be generous for some of these same foster care children, teens in Summit County, with purchasing a gift card. And at first thought, you go, I don't have enough. I don't have enough. There's not enough, Lord. There's not enough. And so these loaves and these fish are just not enough. Because there's problems in my neighborhood. There's problems in my city. There's issues in my community. There's struggles at work. And I see all of these needs, but I can't meet them. So what I am is not enough, Lord, to be able to meet all of the needs here. And so I see these problems. I identify and I'm aware of all of these needs, and I want to be generous, but Lord, I have limitations. The problem is those limitations keep us from action. They keep us from moving forward. They keep us from doing something because we're like, I just don't have what it takes, Jesus. I don't have enough. There's only so much food here. And I love the specific instructions that Jesus gives next. What's he tell him? He says, bring them here to me. And don't miss this. Bring them here to me. He's telling the disciples, what do you have? What do you possess? What is in your hands? Then whatever's in your hands and whatever you have, if you bring it to me, it will always be more than enough. Will always be. And so they bring those fish, they bring those loaves, and all of a sudden it's like, man, we're going to feed 20,000 people. The disciples were not wrong in their assessment that they didn't have enough, but they make the same mistake that you and I make. We get stuck looking in our own limitations instead of looking to the Lord. Right? We get stuck in our limits and what we're able to do and what we're not able to do instead of giving them to the Lord. He's like, what do you have? Whatever you have, are we willing to bring to the Lord? Because so often in life, here's where we struggle, is we focus on what we don't have instead of what we do have. I don't know if there's anything more frustrating or irritating in this world than hanging Christmas lights. I almost want to go back to the old school monster bulbs, because when one of those goes out, you know just to unscrew it and put a new one in. But the new strands, like the icicle, I got icicle lights, and I tested them all. And I replaced about 20 bulbs, and they were all working, and I hung them. And last night, I powered them up. I went, are you for real? They were all working. They were more than enough. I did the work, I did the effort, and now we're like, okay, and now it's like, oh man, and so it's constantly what? I don't have the resources, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the abilities. And so whatever they look like, they're just going to look like that. And how often do we do that in other areas of our life other than Christmas lights? Where we're like, it'll be okay. Somebody else will deal with it. Somebody else will come and fix it. Somebody else will make the repairs. Somebody else will put more time and energy. Someone else will be more generous. And I'm wondering if the Lord is just letting us know this morning, whatever it is you have in your hands is more than enough. And you don't have to have more than the person next to you. You don't have to have more than the person behind you. You don't have to have more than the person watching online this morning. You just have to be you. Because who you are is more than enough. And I love what happens when the disciples get past their limitations. I love what happens in our text as we continue reading in verse 19. It says, and he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up how many baskets? 12 baskets. Start with 5 loaves, end up with 12 baskets. Just making sure we all see this. Of broken pieces that were left over. Leftovers. Jesus is so much more than enough that what you start with, he multiplies, and when you're done, you have leftovers. And so now there's leftover. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And so now Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he fed 20, could be up to, maybe could have exceeded 20,000 people with what the disciples had. The miraculous takes place, and Jesus is able to do what the disciples could not do. He's able to do something miraculous because they finally were willing to relinquish what they had in their hands. And is it possible Jesus wants to take our effort and multiply it in ways beyond our imagination? Let that sink in for a moment, that he wants to multiply what you have and to exceed what you could ever do with it, far beyond your own imagination. Of course he wants to. Is it possible Jesus wants to do all of these things and he's just waiting on you to take the first step? I love the quote from St. Augustine. Without God we cannot, without us God will not. Let me repeat that. Without God we cannot, but without us God will not. What's he saying? He's saying you have to be willing. You have to be a vessel. You have to be, as we talked about last week, that conduit that allows to have intake and outtake. That the Holy Spirit, the presence of the Lord, should flow through us. Our generosity, who comes from him, should be willing and able to flow through us. But he's asking us to take the first step. He's asking us to do our part. He's waiting on us to move from a desire of generosity to an action of generosity. Right? We see a video and we're like, someone should do something for those kids. Pastor Anthony, you should. Your kids are younger and they need more. So you take on 6 foster kids. We'll help you, though. Maybe he's asking us to do our part. If I had to put it in a formula, it would look like this. What we have plus who God is equals enough. Right? What we have plus who God is enough. It's really simple. It's a faith that looks past the limitations, and it brings what we possess to the Lord. It says, God, this is what I have. This is who I am. And I'm going to bring that to you. And when God multiplies it, lives are changed. And we assume that our generosity is only has a small impact. And it only meets the financial needs. Or maybe when it's our time, maybe some of those limitations as well. But I want you to know our generosity, it impacts us. It actually changes more than just our mind and more than just our heart. The Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York, they did some research, and here's what they said. They said generosity lowers our blood pressure, lowers our risk of dementia, lessens our anxiety and depression, and reduces our cardiovascular risk, and increases our overall happiness. What? So if you find yourself with some physical limitations, try generosity. Try generosity. Here's the crazy thing. Their research said that the person who was generous can see all of these things, and it reduces those areas of cardiovascular risk, and it increases our overall happiness. The crazy thing is is the research also concluded it did the same thing for the recipient. What? So the giver and the recipient can receive the same benefits? Why? Because if we're willing of what's in our hands to give it to God and allow him to multiply it, look what he does with the rest. Because with what we have and who God is, it's always more than enough. So this morning, I want to just share with you, it's a little longer video, but last week I had a video, this week I have a video. And can I just, before the video is played, can I just tell you, lean into the context of what's being said, look past, because you're going to hear something, you're going to hear a story of crazy generosity. It's crazy. And I don't want you to be like, okay, so if I'm going to be generous, I have to do what they do. No, you don't. You don't. But I pray that it increases your faith. And it motivates you to say, whatever it is we do have, are we willing to partner with God for who he is, that it would be more than enough? Turn your attention to the screen.
I had an accident and my hip was broken in so many pieces. I have 2 rods in my hip.
She's an angel among us. If you watch her in the bread company, everyone comes in to see Catherine.
You know, we sell the bread, but I feel like there are some people who specifically come with prayer requests, and I go pray for them.
One day when we were sharing, she said she was in need of a different car, that her car was needing expensive repairs.
I had been saving money, but I knew it wasn't enough, so I knew I would take a few years to save for it.
So a couple months later, I went in and I said, Catherine, how's your car fund coming? And she said, I gave it all away. And I looked at her and she said there was a widow in need, and I gave her the $5,000.
I struggled a lot when I gave that money. And I said, I feel okay, but do you think I did the right thing? I mean, I cannot give what I don't have, so I just gave what I had.
I was shocked, and so I come home and I tell Pete that we needed to help Catherine with her car fund. He looked at me and he said, no, I think we need to buy Catherine a car. And I said, okay, great. Pete called Scott and said, do you know Catherine at Great Harvest? And he said, yes, he did. Pete said, well, we'd like to buy her a car. He asked Pete, do you want it used or new car? And it just hit him right in the face. Why would he ask me that? Of course I would want a used car. That's good enough. He just paused for a moment and he said, I want a new car. And he said it was silent on the phone for a few seconds. And Scott said, whoa, I want to help. And so he pitched in some.
So she came to the bakery and she asked me, if you were to buy a car, what kind of a car would you like? I said, Debbie, I'm not really planning to buy a car, but she said, oh, just tell me.
And she said, I'd like a SUV, cruise control, and she said, I'd like a light color. And we called Scott, and he said, I think I've got the perfect car. So Pete said, can we deliver it tomorrow? So we have the bread company owner and his family, Scott and his family, and our family. And Catherine sees us all coming in, and she's just all excited to see everyone.
And I went to give them hugs, and I said, what's Pete doing here? I didn't have the biggest idea. When I went out,
and so we walked her over to the car. We said, Catherine, this is your new car.
so I said, for me, this is for me. I said, well, I knew God had many cars, but I didn't know He had a new one for me. So God had new cars for me.
We all stood there in tears as we saw the joy on Catherine's face, and we got to be a part of it. And the joy of that was unbelievable.
So right, it was such an excitement to drive it.
We told Catherine that we would like this to be confidential. But I kept running into people who would say, I heard what you did for Catherine. It wasn't even us, it was Catherine. It all started with Catherine giving of what she had to a widow to help her, and it just continues on. Generosity begets generosity.
We don't give in order to receive. We give because it's the nature of Jesus Christ. He gave us His life. So we have the DNA of Jesus Christ of giving. Yeah, so this is one story I will never forget in my life.
I love that she's just testifying in her car. Come on, Lord, you are good. I don't know if you hear a story like this, and for me, when I even mentioned it in that last song, it's not that in our prayer, it's not that all things that we walk through will be good, right? Because here's this woman with rods in her hip from falling and breaking and working, and now she's got to raise money for a car fund. But who could orchestrate such a plan? Right? Who behind the scenes could be working in multiple hearts and multiple lives with this heart of generosity other than God Himself? And I love, I don't know if you caught it of what she said. She said, I knew God had many cars, but I didn't know He had a new one for me. Right? As in, God's got a lot of things, but I didn't know He had new cars. I didn't know He had one for me, and yet He had one hand-selected just for her. But I love what they said. They said it wasn't about us. It started with her. She saw a need. She was aware. She's raising money for her own, and then all of a sudden she's going to give that away because of another need. And so how do we have this heart of generosity? How do we move from awareness to action? And there's probably multiple ways. There's maybe even hundreds of ways that we could do that. But I'm just going to give you one way as we close this morning, and it's this. If you want to activate your generosity, start small. Start small. Because you see a video like this and you're like, Lord, please, no. Don't ask me. It was just a number of years ago where Pastor Angel and I, we had a minivan, like 145,000 miles on it, and I was like, okay, let's sell it and find a new car, and newish. Both of us were like, we're not supposed to. There was a family in the church, hadn't kids, and so we gave it to them. And I was like, it's what we're supposed to do. And there's always that struggle, like, were we supposed to? I mean, we could have got at least $2,000 too. And I know $2,000 for most people is not, but for us, that was life-changing, right? I was like, okay. And so we gave it away, and sure enough, a week later, somebody else who doesn't even attend the church from over 100 miles away said, hey, we just feel like we're supposed to give you it was a Honda Pilot with 150,000 miles on it. And I was like, sounds new to me, right? And it was just like, God, you saw, and I'm not saying, please don't take, this is not a prosperity gospel, right? This is not like if you give, and so if you give like a Chevette, God will bring you a Cadillac. No, that's not how it works, okay? But what I am saying is just start small. What do you have? And sometimes we delay in our generosity. And hear me on this. When I say start small, this isn't just with our finances. What did we talk about on the front end? Let me share from last week. So start small with your thoughts. What if in the morning you just take 5 minutes and you begin to recalibrate your mind and your thoughts, and you begin to quote scriptures? I would encourage you, we do this in our family sometimes. Grab a dry erase marker, use the mirror, it wipes off. Just make sure it's dry erase. And put on there, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That I am the workmanship of the Lord, that it's Him and me, and just, man, recalibrate those thoughts, but start small, maybe 5 minutes a day. Be generous with your words. So God, who can I lift up today? Take 5 minutes at your lunch, at your break, and say, okay, God, I'm gonna pray, and I'm gonna text somebody, and I wanna encourage somebody. God, who needs a word of encouragement this morning? Start small, one person. Start small when it comes to, maybe it's money. We asked everybody to bring $1. That was it for the offering today. And some of you were like, no, I wanted to give more. But if it was $1, you started with something. People ask me all the time, like, hey, talk about how come, and we share it, like we mentioned it last week, that Jesus talked more about money than anything else. 5 times more than prayer. Over 2,000 times in the scripture, it talks about being generous and giving. Start small. Maybe you set up a reoccurring gift. You're like, I can't give the way I want to give yet because of where I'm at. Start small. Set up a reoccurring gift, $5 a week. Try it. And then what you'll realize is, man, if I can give 5, maybe 5 months goes by, a couple months goes by, and you're like, I could probably bump that up to 10. Go to 10. And next thing you know, you're realizing, man, I could make it even for. Just start. Start small. Maybe in the area of your influence, start small. Your time. Maybe in your calendar, block out every day. God, I want to be generous with my time. I'm gonna be mindful of my calendar, and so every day I'm gonna put 15 minutes. I'm gonna put a half hour on my calendar where I want to be generous with my time, and I want to call people. I want to encourage people. I want to have lunch with somebody. And so, what do you got to do? You got to put desire into action, but you start small. It doesn't mean every day you take somebody out to lunch, but maybe once a month. Whatever that would be, start small. Just do something. Just do something. Move in a way. Take that generosity from a desire to an action. I love what Proverbs 11:24 says in the Message. It says, the world of the generous gets larger and larger. Right? The world of the generous gets larger and larger. It's one of those things where it becomes bigger and we see more opportunities. And we're like, man, God, I didn't know that you could expand this area of my heart, this area of my life. So start where you are. Don't allow the limitations keep you from giving. Trust the Lord to multiply what you do have. What you do have. And I can promise you, the results are limitless. You will see God multiply in ways that you didn't even think it was possible, yet He does. So here's how I'll end today. God is waiting on you. All you need to do is do something. Just something. Do something. Whether that's with time, your influence, your actions, your words, your thoughts. Today as we close, I don't want to steal Pastor Anthony's thunder, but maybe it is with one of these cards. So there'll be a card that you can take after service, just a postcard. It says Merry Christmas. On the back of it, you can write a prayer, a word of encouragement, a scripture verse. In a couple of weeks, you'll return that with a $25 gift card. He'll give more details of what kind of cards. But our hope and our prayer is that every teenager in the foster care system will receive a $25, at least one, if not two, $25 gift cards for Christmas this year. Here's what's crazy. This is how this works. So we as a church gave last year and the year before. 2 years ago, every single teenager, I can't remember the exact total, I can't remember, it's crazy. But every teenager got 2 gift cards. Here's why. Because it started with one church and then it moved to 2. And next thing you know, there were 60 and 80 churches giving. So that's the multiplication we're talking about. It starts with one person, but then it multiplies to where every teenager in the foster care system for the entire state of Ohio received 2 gift cards, 2 $25 gift cards for Christmas. It didn't, and this isn't a knock, so hear me on this. It didn't come from a government resource. It didn't come from a large donor of a CEO of a corporation. It came from people like you and me who said, I can do one. And God said, if you can do one and they can do one, then we're going to start multiplication. And if this church could do 100 and that church could do 100, then this church could do 1,000. There was one church that gave over 2,000 gift cards. It's just us saying yes. It's just us doing something. Something. So your dollar today was something. And I appreciate, because for some of you, that was a sacrifice. Thank you for your sacrifice. And I'm thankful for the church that gets this heart of generosity, that there's always more than enough. So I'm going to close out in prayer. So if you feel like you want to do something, and maybe that starts small, would you just pray and ask God where? So Lord, this morning as we close our time together, show us. Show us. Maybe it's today, maybe it's next week, maybe it's next month. Would you show us? Would you help us to be more aware? And as we're aware, would we move to a place of action? So God, help us to start, even if it's small, even if it's with one thing, even if it's with one encouraging word, even if it's with one belonging, if it's with one positive thought today. Help us, Lord, to be more like you so that we can be more like you to others around us. Help us to live this life of generosity. In Jesus' name.